I had to get up before I started. I record 4 videos at a time, so I record for the whole month. It's easier to knock it out in 2 to 2.5 hours in one sitting than to have to set up every so often to do it for 1 or 2 videos at a time. So halfway through, I've got 2 out of the way, and now I've got 2 more to do, this one and another. I had to stop and get some protein. I've got some trail mix here. So if I'm chewing on this one, I don't apologize. I am peckish. So it's 1:30 and p.m. And after this, I'll finally eat lunch. This video, this is something I had been percolating in my mind that I had wanted to do. And I realized, let's just go start. Let's start with autumn, fall. And I'm going to do this seasonally now. Book recommendations for each season. Some people do like to pick books according to the season, which makes it especially fall and summer. Like there are summer reads and there are autumn reads, right? But there are certain books that I do think that you reading them at particular times of the year only enhance the reading experience because there's something in the mood or the atmosphere or the environment of that book, the time of that book, the season of that book in which the plot's taking place that is directly correlating with the season that you're in regarding the weather, right? Not a metaphorical season. These dried cherries are so good. Ooh, that dried cherry was popping. Flavor. And when I do this moving forward, I'll create a playlist. And when I do this moving forward for each year, for each season, I'll try not to recycle books moving forward. So when I do this in 2025 and I have a list of autumn reads, it'll be a different list because even by that time I would have discovered different books to add on this list and to have read different books to add to each list. Let's jump in because I've got some books to discuss. Now, this particular list, looking at my shelves, a lot of Victorian classics, which I think is fitting. And this is mainly a list of classics with the exception of 3. Let's just, in no particular order, let's dive right in. Because Dracula, obviously, this time of the year, people are looking for a spookier vibe, okay? Atmosphere. If I could stop coughing, that would be fantastic. So yeah, this time of the year, people are looking for a spookier vibe. Dracula. Cliche, yeah, perhaps, but you can't, you gotta put Dracula on the list, right? I enjoyed Dracula when I read it. I have a review on this on my channel. Do I have a review on Dracula? Nah, I don't think I do. Do I have a review on Dracula? I know I've mentioned it in one of my classics videos or something back in 2022. But anyway, Dracula. I mean, I'm going to try to do quick synopses on these books, but I enjoyed Dracula. At the time when this was published, I'm sure this was somewhat terrifying for people. Now, I don't know if you would call it scary, but it's definitely, it has atmosphere, but I actually find it to be a little bit more comedic. Perhaps there is some brilliant, witty stuff in this novel. And so it is just at this point, somebody on a different video commented something about Dracula and how in its own right, Dracula has become mythology. And I think that's so appropriate. We have so many spin-offs because of this novel and adaptations and interpretations. And so if you are into Cold Castles and the original vampire story, okay. I mean, vampire mythology has been around for eons, way before this book was ever published. But when we think of vampires and we think of this as the birth of it in some cases. So you have a lunatic in an asylum. I read that off the cover. The back, it's taking place between Transylvania and London. And it's just, it has a vibe. It has a vibe. I'm going to try to keep this pretty casual and not go on and on. I had to talk about Dracula. Okay. Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White, another book that just has a lot of mystique and atmosphere around it. And there are times when you're on the edge of your seat because you're like, where is this going to go? What's this character going to do? Who is this woman in white? And that's how the book starts. You have your main character who encounters a woman in white on a street. And from there, you go into this eerie, though a bit cryptic tale about this woman who's married to this man named Sir Percival Glyde, and he's a bad egg, but you kind of love to hate him. He's such a fascinating character, and what happens with this poor lady. It's intriguing. It's intriguing. It's been a while since I've read The Woman in White. Oh my gosh, I'm flipping through my annotations. Like, I just flagged quotes. I didn't even highlight them. So I need to reread The Woman in White at some point. When did I read this book? Was it actually in 2020? I read this book in 2020. It's been 4 years. So again, the details of this are a little bit hazy, and when I posted the review on Instagram, it was way before I did detailed book reviews. So Wilkie Collins, his writing is beautiful. And even so, that book is humorous. I do remember chuckling a little bit. Ooh. I have not thus far discussed Shakespeare on this channel. Macbeth. I'm chewing a cashew. Macbeth is actually my favorite Shakespearean play. You've got 3 witches, murder, ghosts. Does it get much more autumnal than that? I know that Macbeth is a tragedy, but for me, it's also low-key funny. All Shakespeare's make me laugh, even his tragedies, because the comebacks, the wit, the insults, hilarious. I also feel like if you are new to Shakespeare and you don't quite know where to start, I think Macbeth is a good place to start. And I think Julius Caesar is also a good place to start. This just, again, lots of atmosphere. It's iconic. I mean, this is where double, toil and trouble comes from, right? The 3 witches are fantastic. And it's quick. It's a quick little autumnal read. Murder, intrigue, ghosts, and witches. Does it get more autumn than that? I don't think so. It's in the vein, though, of Macbeth, because yes, Shakespeare was English, but Macbeth is taking place in Scotland. And we have our 3 witches. This is a Scottish author, Susan Ferrier, where there are 3 aunts. And those 3 aunts are inspired by the 3 witches in Macbeth. And Susan Ferrier was a contemporary of Jane Austen, so she was writing during the Regency period. And actually at the time, she was outselling Jane Austen. But you don't really hear about her anymore. And she has 2 other novels, and I'm waiting for Virago to publish them. Please, they don't know I breathe air. So, Marriage by Susan Ferrier. This is a story that if you are a Jane Austen fan, highly recommend. Because you have 2 characters, female characters, who make very different decisions in marriage and how that plays out for them. But keep in mind that Susan Ferrier, do I find this novel funny? When did I read this novel? I think I read this novel in 2020, due for a reread. And these 2 women who actually make 2 very different decisions in marriage are twins. And so they're raised in Scotland. One of them does end up in England, and the other one stays in Scotland, I believe, for a time before she goes to England, London, I think in particular. And so the one that stays in Scotland stays under the care of her Scottish relatives. And so she's very different from her prissier, more English sister. And the interactions are low-key hilarious. It's subtle. It's a subtle type of humor. But if you're interested in that type of Jane Austen kind of vibe with a Scottish twist, holla. Why did I put this on an autumn list? I read this in 2020. In the summer, fantastic at the time as a summer read. But again, it's taking place in the UK. The weather alone makes it fitting to read during the autumnal months, especially the Scotland bits because of the weather. There's also some fantastic dialect in that novel. Fantastic. It can be a little bit difficult to read. You have to warm up to it, but brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Agnes Grey by Bronte. The lesser loved, if you will, underappreciated Bronte sister. Agnes Grey, the weather is cold and it's clammy and it's damp. And you have this Agnes who is she's a governess, and these children that she's watching they're absolute menaces. And there's still her own kind of love story percolating in the background, but it's in true Bronte Gothic fiction fashion. You can't talk about autumn reading lists without talking about the Bronte sisters and their Gothic fiction. I don't have, actually, Jane Eyre is up next, but I didn't include Wuthering Heights because Wuthering Heights for me just is not a favorite. But Agnes Grey, I think, deserves more love. It's just cold. It's a cold novel, and by that I mean it's the environment, the weather, and Agnes is a brilliant main character. She's a gentler soul than those that she has to govern, those two rich menace kids. And she's not treated well in this rich household, but she does the best she can with her lot in life. But just for the climate alone, Agnes Grey. I don't really hear too many people talk about Agnes Grey. And when people do talk about Anne Bronte, they typically talk about The Tenant of Waterfall Hall. Jane Eyre. You know I couldn't talk about an autumn list without Jane Eyre. Things go bump in the night. There's a woman in the attic, and there are some supernatural elements to this book. Again, it's classic Gothic fiction, which I think no one quite did like the Bronte sisters. This is my favorite novel of all time. I've read it 4 times. I mean, this is annotated to oblivion. And the very first time that I read Jane Eyre, back in 2013, actually, that was the first time I read, 2014. No, that's not true. I read it in college, believe it or not, was the first time I read it. So 2012. Yeah, 2012. It was the second time that I read this novel that it hit me, and I read it in October. Perfect timing. You gotta wait for specifically October, I think, to read Jane Eyre and get the best out of it. Like I said, things go bump in the night. There are footsteps in the hallway, and it's just cold, and you're in this old English manor, and it's massive, and it's cold, and it's damp, and it's just melancholy in a lot of ways. Jane Eyre. I mean, I'm trying not to take too much about these novels. I'm just putting them out there. It's the vibe. I picked these books on vibes. Vibes. My last Victorian classic. I like the Victorians. They're wild. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Absolute hedonism and debauchery in this novel. But again, vibes. And one could argue, if you will, there's a bit of the maybe magical realism when you think about this character who's trying to preserve his youth, and so his painting ages while he doesn't. His painting is bearing the brunt of all of his decisions in life, and it's showing him as he really is, and it's getting this beautiful young man. His painting is getting grotesque. It's becoming grotesque and warped, and it's spoiling, if you will. Whereas Dorian Gray is not aging a bit throughout the years. And so maybe you could say that there's a supernatural or mystical element to this. But again, this is a novel, I think, vibes. Read it in the autumn because it's short, quick, and to the point, but it's a little eerie. Dorian Gray, I've read this twice, is a fun time, let me tell you. You cannot talk about, I'm cliche, I don't care. You can't talk about an autumn reading list without The Secret History by Donna Tartt. It takes place on a college campus in the autumn. In New England, in Vermont. And there are descriptions of, there are other seasons in this book, but there are descriptions in particular about New England and Vermont in the fall season, and it's almost tangible. And it's back to school season. Fall is back to school season. And so it's only appropriate to have a campus novel. And it's also, what do they call it? Dark academia. That's what it is. Dark academia is most fitting in the autumn. Is this book worth the hype? For me, it is. For me, it is. It's really, to me, The Secret History, which I think makes it so brilliant. It's a play on Greco-Roman tragedy, and in Greek and Roman plays. And if you really pay attention and you want to go on a symbolism deep dive, when crows are mentioned, when certain words are mentioned, certain imagery are mentioned, Donna Tartt is paying homage to what the Greeks and Romans considered to be omens. And you could go on a nice little treasure hunt in this twisted, really, it's a book about a murder with these crazy characters, and it's isolated, and it's very academic in the atmosphere or the environment of it. And I think this is, again, one of those books that gets better for me when I read it again, because the second time I read this book, I plan to definitely do a deep dive on the imagery, because she is constantly dropping hints. But if you're a fan of Greek tragedy, worth it. I know some people don't like The Secret History, they think it's overhyped. I do think that, I always say this, not every book is everybody's cup of tea, right? The Secret History is one of those, but me, I'm a fan. Okay. Grove by Esther Kinsky. This takes place in Italy, in a village southeast of Rome. And when people think of books set in Italy, they think of heat, right? But this book is taking place in the colder months. And Esther Kinsky spends a lot of time describing the environment. And if you're into nature writing, it's cold, it's rainy, it's dreary, it's misty, and it's melancholy. This is a book about grief, actually. And I read this again in the spring when I first read it. But it's a cold novel, again, based on the climate that she's describing. This is not, I'm Italy, I'm drinking wine and popping olives. No, this is something different. And it's melancholy and gray, and it's damp. Those are the adjectives that come to my mind when I think of this novel. And again, there are depictions of graveyards and tunnels and mountains. The sound of the rain when this main character goes back to this particular village in Rome, and she's just outside of Rome, and she's recounting the memories that she had with people who are no longer with her as she's going through this, revisiting this place. So there's a lot of nostalgia and longing in this book, and grief. And it's just, I think it just perfectly fits when the temperatures start to change. The weather starts to cool down, and it starts to get darker earlier in the day, right? Can you believe it? By the time I post this, summer is over. It's fall, according to the calendar. It's still warm where I live, but it's going to be dark at night soon. Dark at night. That was not eloquent. It's about to be, you come home from work and it's dark. Crazy. My girl, Hilary Mantel. Wolf Hall. I picked the first book. I'm chewing. I'm eating my snack. I don't care. Oh, shoot. I'm losing power. You could argue that, I gotta get my charger. You could argue that, just put the whole series up here, but I'm going to highlight specifically Wolf Hall because it's just the first of the book. Again, it's Tudor fiction. There's castles and intrigue, political intrigue, and again, descriptions of cold places. Now, of course, this spans quite some time. So again, this is just the first of 3 and told from the perspective of Thomas Cromwell. So you do get various seasons, but when I think of Tudor fiction, I think autumn, okay? Political intrigue, backstabbing, cold halls and stone walls. Like, you can see a theme in the books that I've picked. I read this in October. I'm stuttering. I read this in October the first time I read it. Perfect time to read it. Perfect time to read it. Especially when the days get longer and darker, and when the darkness throughout the day gets longer, this is the kind of novel that you cozy up with. 1 second, let me get my charger because my phone's screaming at me. Second to last. Get myself situated. I'm all over the place. Abigail by Magda Szabo. This is translated from the Hungarian. And this book is such a treat. It's academic in that it's taking place in an all-girls school, a strict all-girls school, and this rich young kid who's, her mother has passed, or her father's been widowed, and it takes place during World War II, and so this girl is sent to a convent school. Is it a convent? 1 second. Am I getting this confused with another book? False. So this young teenager, if you will, she's coming into her teenage years. She's sent to a boarding school during World War II. Her father does this to keep her safe, and you have this girl coming of age in such a critical time in this boarding school. She's getting acclimated to it, and all of the drama amongst her peers and the teachers while she's in this school. And it feels there's something insular or maybe isolated about this book, because you know that World War II is happening around this boarding school in Hungary, but the students it seems vague, abstract almost. They're still in a routine, and it's very fascinating how this author does this. But again, you just get sucked into this very academic, and I don't mean that in like a dark academia way, though I think fans of dark academia would like this, but it's just it's a very scholastic, that's the word, environment. These students are going through the routine. Gina and the main character, they're going through the routine of this school, and it's just in the midst of World War II. They're the things that every young teenage girl deals with in the midst of chaos going on the world stage. And again, it's school. It's back to school season, so I had to throw this up here. But also, again, the majority of this novel takes place when it's cold outside. This would be a good winter novel too, but again, it's scholastic, right? It's scholastic. It also kind of gives you the vibes of like Harry Potter, when Harry is going back to school after the summer and he's reuniting with his friends. Also, Gina is she's wealthy. Her father is well-to-do. And so if you're a fan of Jane Austen's novel, Emma, Gina is in some cases having to humble herself in some cases, but it's endearing because she's just a young girl, she's learning. And so that has its own charm as well. Last, I had to throw in the Fellowship of the Ring / Lord of the Rings as a whole, but I had to throw in the Fellowship of the Ring because it's actually my favorite out of the three, because I have a thing for beginnings. I tend to favor the first out of a series for some reason, or a trilogy. This is one of my favorite books of all time. Actually, every time I read it, it gets better. I'm a massive fan of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And there's something about the coziness of reading about people on a journey. And it's Lord of the Rings, so there's a lot of time spent walking. And I find that to be very comforting. And when I'm in the mood to read Lord of the Rings, I read it starting in the autumn if I'm going to pick a novel up. I had planned to read The Two Towers again this year. I haven't read it in quite some time, but we'll see if I get to it. I'm going to prioritize books I haven't read versus a reread in this moment of my life. But even the cover of my particular edition, which was a Christmas gift to myself like 2 years ago now, it's autumnal. Okay? And as the days get darker, there's just something about reading about these characters on a journey. It's Lord of the Rings. Do I need to say anything more than that? No, I have a whole review on this book, but I had to throw Lord of the Rings in. This one I'm not going to throw because it's heavy. But there it is. I feel like I didn't elaborate too much on each of these books. When I looked at my shelf and I wanted to do this video spontaneously, this is what I initially pulled. Now, when I do this in the future, there'll be a different set of books, but I picked these books on vibes and atmosphere. Okay. Have you read any of these books? When the seasons turn, are you one of those people who will pick what they're reading based on the seasons? Let me know. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave me a comment, and feel free to follow me on Instagram where I get up to more book of shenanigans. I post all of my book reviews there first, and I also like to post goofy things in the Instagram stories because I can. Let me eat another cashew. I missed my mouth. Let's try that again. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.